Hillary Clinton swept into Greenland's tiny capital Nuuk today to meet with Russia, Canada and other members of the Arctic Council, supposedly to safeguard that fragile environment. But WikiLeaks cables seen by Newsnight show that behind the scenes governments have been scrambling to carve up the Arctic's oil, gas and other resources as they're uncovered by the rapidly retreating ice. Here's our science editor, Susan Watts.
Only one woman, it seems, can save the polar bears and peoples of the distant north as the ice melts.
Greenland so far.
Oh, I love it. I'm so happy we're having the meeting here.
US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton joined leaders from the Arctic nations in Greenland today for that mission.
Of course, we are here because of our shared concern and commitment to the Arctic. This region faces so many challenges, especially with the harmful effects of climate change on its ecology, natural resources, and the livelihoods of millions of people who are used to living off the land and the seas.
But how does that square with the picture of that same Arctic painted by the leaked US cables seen by Newsnight, where her own diplomats quote conversations about carving up oil and gas resources as the ice retreats? And a few moments later, Mrs. Clinton seemed to have forgotten about the harmful effects of climate change.
There are other issues at stake. The melting of sea ice, for example, will result in more shipping, fishing, and tourism, and the possibility to develop newly accessible oil and gas reserves. We seek to pursue these opportunities.
Of course, it'll all be done in a smart, sustainable way. The area of Arctic ice expands each winter and contracts each summer. But it's the drop in the volume of ice at the summer low that's now caught the attention of scientists. Imagine a monster ice cube, 10 kilometers high, 10 kilometers wide, and 10 kilometers thick. 30 years ago, there was the equivalent of 18 of those in the Arctic. Satellite observations suggest the extent of ice at the Arctic has fallen by about a third in the last 30 years. But there are more gaps in the ice and it's thinner, so the volume is much smaller. Last summer, there was the equivalent of just 4 of those monster ice cubes in the Arctic, a quarter of what had been there in 1979.
We slice, take a thin...
This is the Arctic lab at the University of Cambridge.
We cut little pieces from the core to measure how much salt is in it. New ice has lost about 2/3 of its salt when it first forms. Older ice is almost fresh.
Peter Wadhams is one of the world's leading ice scientists and one of very few civilians allowed to go on Royal Navy nuclear submarines, including this trip on HMS Tireless in 2007. For 40 years, they've been taking him beneath the North Pole to examine the underside of the ice and measure its thickness.
The top of the world was white, just like the bottom of the world, and it was solid. Nobody was really thinking of the fact that this is in fact an ocean 5,000 metres deep.
So what are the chances that there'll be no ice at the North Pole then within a few years?
Oh, pretty high. In fact, it could easily happen that we'll have an ice-free North Pole within a year or two. Each year the retreat in the summer takes the ice back to this kind of line here, which is almost as far as the pole. So it only needs a fairly small extra retreat to actually expose the North Pole. And so I really anticipate that'll happen in the next year or 2 or 3.
The Arctic powers are Russia, Canada, Denmark, which still rules Greenland, Norway and the US. The cables claim the Danish foreign minister joked with the Americans.
If you stay out, then the rest of us will have more to carve up in the Arctic.
The grab for the Arctic accelerated in 2007 when the polar explorer Artur Chilingarov used a submarine to plant a Russian flag on the seabed under the North Pole. According to the cables, a senior Russian official told the Americans that this was a deliberate move by the Kremlin and that Chilingarov was
following orders from the ruling United Russia Party.
The cables also report comments by the Russian ambassador to NATO, saying,
"The 21st century will see a fight for resources, and Russia should not be defeated in this fight."
The immediate battleground is Greenland. Last year, the Danish sent their navy to intervene when Greenpeace tried to stop Cairn Energy drilling for oil in Arctic waters. 3 weeks ago, Cairn sent another rig north, and again it was boarded by Greenpeace. The British oil company Cairn Energy has its headquarters in Edinburgh.
Just a few hundred people up over the rocks into the castle.
He sees his company as pioneers in the Arctic.
But right now, we're the people leading the charge, and we do that very safely and responsibly. We're ahead of everybody else, but there are a large number of other companies now have made a Greenland entry, and they're all watching, and they're all waiting to see what we find.
But Cairn are up against big rivals. The cables show that American diplomats believe Greenland
is on a clear track to independence
and see this as
a unique opportunity
for American gas and oil companies to get a foothold. They report a senior Greenland official as saying Greenland is
just one big oil strike away
from independence.
They say there's around about 50 billion barrels of oil equivalent to find around Greenland. To put that in context, that's the equivalent of what the North Sea has produced over the last 40 years. So it's a substantial prize for the Greenland government, the Greenland people, and of course for Cairn as well.
As Cairn's rig left Turkey for the Arctic last month, Greenpeace launched a nighttime raid.
Greenpeace have taken this action to protect the pristine Arctic environment from dangerous deep-sea drilling.
Greenpeace restated that position to Newsnight today from their ship Esperanza.
There is a carve-up of the Arctic that we're seeing. The likes of Cairn Energy are rushing in and sparking a dangerous new Arctic oil rush. Instead of doing this, we think it's time to go beyond oil. We need to be investing in clean, cutting-edge technologies to power our economy without wrecking the environment and without raising dangerous stakes amid the icebergs and glaciers of the high north.
The cables also expose US concerns about Canada's territorial claims to the Northwest Passage and to
seabed resources that extend to the edge of the continental shelf.
They also report Canadian Premier Stephen Harper telling NATO to keep out of the Arctic.
The protection and promotion of Canada's sovereignty over what is our north.
He is said to have claimed that some European countries without Arctic territories were trying to use NATO to give them
influence in an area where they don't belong.
What's made a difference in the Arctic is that the speed with which the sort of ice is declining is much faster than people thought it would be a few years ago. So there's a real scramble going on for resources, a kind of mini version of the scramble for Africa in the 19th century beginning to happen. And everybody wants to get who thinks they've got a chance to get at those resources, wants to get in there and stake their claim. So there's a tremendous heightening of the political tensions around this issue.
I was in the Arctic in August 2008. And since then, the volume of summer ice has continued to drop. A sea route is opening up across the top of Russia, cutting a third of summer journeys for cargo ships from northern Europe to the Far East. New fishing grounds are being uncovered. And today, the Arctic Council signed its first treaty, a tentative step, perhaps, towards dividing the spoils.
Susan Watts.